Hello, everyone. My name is Philip Young, and I am a professional spiritual advisor. I use a number of tools in my practice: astrology, tarot, oracle cards, the I Ching, muscle testing to do past life regression. And what I want to do in this video is actually take a look at the presidential election through the lens of astrology. I've completed two other videos, one using the I Ching and asking a specific question and getting an answer from the Book of Changes. And I've also done one with tarot cards, doing a 10-card tarot reading about the election. And those videos are also available. But this video is going to be probably the most complex of the three because I'm going to be looking at the astrology and thinking about what are some, I'm going to use the word predictions about the election. I'm not going to try to predict who will win the election because what I do feel right now is that trying to be predictive is, by the astrology, not even really going to be too viable. I mean, certainly a prediction can be made and an outcome could turn out to be that, but to actually say that you're getting the information correct, I think is actually a bit of hubris considering what the transits are at this moment. And I'm going to really try to detail that out and explain that because I know people would like to know who's going to win, and certainly I've done my research with other astrologers who have been willing to step out and say who they think will win based on a number of different techniques. And there are multiple techniques in astrology to be used to make predictions. And those techniques have been applied, whether we're talking about looking at transits or progressions, or something called zodiacal releasing, or using perfections or solar arcs. Take your pick. And to the point of where we are right now, I would say I've been able to identify a number of astrologers that are very good at their job. They do the work at a professional level, and they have identified that Trump will win. I have also found a number of astrologers using, again, the same techniques, sophisticated techniques, and their prediction is that Kamala Harris will win. I've done my own work with the perfections and also looking at transits as well as the the progressions of energy. And there can be moments of favorability towards one or the other candidate, but nothing that would be definitive that I would want to step in and say, I think this person's going to win the election. More important to me is what are we dealing with astrologically that are going to be the issues that are predictable, that are going to apply no matter who ends up winning this election. And that is taking a look at what's going on with the current transits and where they were historically, because they have all been extremely significant and they are all in play at this particular time. And I'm actually going to show that visually. And so what I'm going to switch to is a view of looking at the charts, and it's going to be a number of charts. I am going to look at the United States chart. I am going to look at Donald Trump's chart. I'm going to look at Kamala Harris's chart. I'm also going to look at the charts of the three periods that are being replicated by transit, which include the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World War II. So, not to put too fine a point on it, but we are absolutely living in a highly volatile and chaotic time that is, by its design, meant to be hard to predict. Now, what I mean by that is that prediction can shift. And what I would offer to you, for those of you that have been following this race, that have been following the situation, that there was a moment, most likely after the presidential debate between Trump and Biden, that a prediction that Trump would win the White House would have been a slam dunk. If there had been an effort to keep Biden, on the ticket, considering what happened in the debate, what was revealed in the debate, then there's a very good likelihood that anyone that was going to be making predictions would predict that Trump would win and probably confidently succeed in that prediction. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on, what position you want to take, the Biden did drop out of the race. Harris did come in, and it did create a scenario in which we were back to a level of uncertainty. I think that the transits I want to show you are about it being specifically a period of uncertainty. And I have this when I work with clients personally and in my professional work, that I will get clients that want to know what's coming in terms of prediction, which is certainly can be done. And I've had very great success using this tool to make helpful predictions for clients. And the thing is that sometimes the predictions can be very straightforward and can be very easy to identify. And I can feel very confident in saying, this is something that's coming for you with regard to relationship or with regard to career or with regard to family. But there are other times when I'm working with a chart and it's very clear, equally clear, that it's meant to be unclear. In other words, the transits that show up in someone's chart, or the progressions that show up in their chart, or their perfection year, whatever it happens to be, the message at the time is that you're not going to get a clear message. That's literally the message. And that you're going to have to muddle through, or you're going to have to work through this period of lack of clarity. And what's interesting is that the one thing that is generally solidly predictable is that the time periods can be identified. And that's what I'm going to show with the charts here is what we can expect shifts to be when they're going to happen. And to recognize that for the moment right now, the unpredictability is just quite honestly off the scale. So much so that I think that if we take a sort of multiverse kind of concept and go, okay, well, at this particular moment, what are the different predictive pathways from, maybe low prediction to higher prediction that we could actually consider? I think one of the ones we could consider is that the election doesn't actually happen. For some reason, something transpires and the election is delayed or interfered with in some way that it does not literally happen on November the 5th. I think that in many ways, from a predictive model, that is a viable one. Do I think it's the most likely one? No, I don't, but I can't rule it out because these forces that are in play are clearly indicating that that is a possibility. Another one could be that by the time of the election, there is only one candidate to be selected. That could be because of any number of reasons. It could be, again, assassination attempts, both not only again for Trump, but also for Harris. It could be illness, could happen to one of the two candidates. There could be an accident that happens. Absolutely in play. It's a possibility. In terms of the likelihood of what we want to set as an expectation and what we might see as the most common outcome is that the two candidates are viable, they're running, it's happening, the election's actually happening. And through that process, there will be some determination, but not necessarily a determination that's clear cut. It's possible. I mean, again, another part of this predictive energy could be that there could be a landslide for one of the candidates. Again, of the ones I'm mentioning so far, I don't consider them the most likely or even likely to the degree that they are comparable to the general direction being that it's probably going to be a very contested race. It's going to be very close, and likely that the decision won't even fall on November the 5th. I would say some conclusion after November the 5th that's solid would even be, again, another prediction that would be on the outside, on the outer rim. Again, looking at things from a predictive standpoint and saying, well, what we really probably are likely to have is um, an undecided count going on into the next day, all kinds of difficulties or problems. There can be accusations, there can be court cases involved, but there will be, I think, potentially, if we get through that particular pathway, like if we get to the pathway where on November the 5th, Harris and Trump are sitting in wherever they're sitting and they're watching the polls and they're watching what's happening, that at the end of that, we will know some sense of direction. And in a way, part of me that's just being a participant. I'm hopeful for that, and the reason for that is I think there's only so much chaos that our minds can actually tolerate before it really becomes very debilitating, not only on a personal level but on a much larger scale. So, what I want to try to help everyone with, or at least provide a perspective, is the idea that this election is bound up in a certain type of astrological history, a certain type of astrological combinations that are really very intense, and that we're in the middle of something that isn't going to be resolved by this election. Now, a little bit of history. I did a presentation back in 2020 for a group called the Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship. And what I looked at that time, it was January of 2020. There was a particular combination with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all being conjunct in Capricorn. And I predicted at that time that we would be entering a period of tremendous change, seismic change. I like the word seismic, that it would be seismic change. And that was on the prelude to coronavirus. I didn't speak necessarily about coronavirus, but I also don't really try to get into specifics. There might have been someone astrologically that could see that. I did not see that particular thing, but I did see very clearly that there would be a major disruption to the fabric, the economic fabric, the societal fabric of really the entire world. And the thing that I did talk about was things that we wouldn't think could be, might end up happening. And I think we're now seeing some of that because also at the time, which I know is not a popular thing to express, and I know this can be a difficult video to perhaps go through if you're going to go through all the way to the end, is that it was the start of a cycle that would take 9 years to 10 years to fully process. And that wasn't anything that people wanted to hear. They wanted to hear we're going to bounce back within a year of whatever this would be, whether it was going to be an economic tsunami, which was certainly possible, or it did turn out to be an economic tsunami, mainly because of what happened with the lockdowns. But the idea that we might be at a place 10 years from now where what we think of as the way healthcare works could be radically rearranged. The way we think about education, radically rearranged. The way we think about money, radically rearranged. All of these things are actually in play very much so. I can speak to those in terms of specifics. Let's use the money example. At the moment, whether you know it or not, the global currency is backed by the US dollar. That gives the US tremendous power, in some ways more power than even its military gives its power. But there has been a longstanding push to try to replace that with something else. Bitcoin could possibly be such an opportunity. Other currencies might try, but it would be still very difficult in terms of whether it would be something like China's currency or Russia's currency or India's currency, wherever the largest countries are with the most power. Would those currencies be able to replace the dollar? And those currencies aren't necessarily doing any better than the dollar happens to be doing. But there's definitely an effort to think about that. So that's in play. And could that be something that manifests before the end of this period that I'm looking at? Certainly. We have AI coming on the scene, which I think is in many ways going to be a fundamental change in how education is done, especially higher education, which has its own problems with creating debt. So my point being that we're in historically a period of revolutionary change, and that I'm going to show you astrologically how that's repeating. So to begin with, I'm going to switch over here to a screen share, and I'm going to show you my computer with my charts on it. And we're going to start with the US chart. This is just a shot of the US chart. And the US chart is not like fixed with absolute clarity. There are a number of different charts available. This is the one that is most commonly used. It's referred to as the Sibley chart, and it's set for July 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There are other charts that lay it out differently, use the same date. I've even found a chart by an astrologer, Jessica Adams, who has a wonderful practice. And she uses a chart based on a letter written in January of 1776, in which the United States is mentioned as the United States for the first time. She feels very confident in working with that chart to get her predictions out. Again, this is also an opportunity to speak philosophically about astrology, and a couple of things that I do want to share with people is that the chart, whether it's a country or whether it's a person, is not the person or the country. It is a framework. It is a narrative, and it's a powerful narrative. There's a lot obviously to be gained from it, since this is what I do for a professional living, and it does have a tremendous impact on people. And there are things that can be seen and shown and understood by looking at the chart of a country or of an individual. But it is important to know that when I talk about astrology, I always talk about it in terms of having 5 keys. 4 of the keys involve data, but the final key is free will. And that creates the things that can be unpredictable within the framework of the chart. Now, the chart does provide a certain container. I like to refer to the chart as being like a vehicle that you drive around in. So the idea being that this vehicle has certain limitations, You can do certain things with it, depending on the kind of driver you are. There are things you can't do with it based on the limitations of the vehicle, which would be whatever the chart setup happens to be, so forth and so on. So this is the core United States chart. I'm not really going to go into detail about it because I want to speak about the details in terms of the chart in relation to the upcoming election. So the next chart I'm going to show you here is the United States chart on the inside. And this is the day of the election on the outside. And I've set it for noontime just because it's going to be an entire day. And the idea of this is to talk about what this means regardless of who is elected. What's going on that election day that's going to be impactful as a moment that is going to be in play for whoever ultimately becomes the next president of the United States. So here's where I'm going to do some drawing and some explaining. So there's tension within this circumstance. And there are a number of different tensions that I want to point out. So the first one is this is Uranus that I'm circling here. And it is currently in the sign of Taurus. And the last time Uranus was in Taurus was between 1934 and 1942. So the period of the Great Depression and the lead up to World War II and the first 2 years of World War II. And it is at 25 degrees. It also happens to be retrograde, which means it's kind of moving backwards in the sky. But it's forming what is called a square relationship with the U.S. natal sun and moon. So the U.S. natal moon and Uranus are squaring. They are in a challenging or conflicting set of positions. And so on the day of the election, Uranus, which is disrupting the day to day, is going to be impacting the moon, which is in Aquarius and in the third house of the US chart. And the third house having to deal with communication, ideals. This is about the United States being, in some ways, an idealistic soul. It's an idealism of soul. And there's a lot of connection between the United States being seen as another version or maybe a great grandchild of Atlantis, or the idea of the ideal society or the society that is different than the rest of the world. And so what we're seeing here is a disruption in the Taurian foundation that is squaring with the moon. So clearly indicating that this election is going to show that there is a world of change that is happening that is really creating disruptive energy around the idealism of the United States at its soul level, at its heart and soul level. Now, not only is this happening, but we also have what's called a Chiron return. So here's Chiron, this little key symbol, and it is in Aries. It is currently also retrograde and moving backwards, and it's moving back into a perfect alignment, 20 degrees, with the natal Chiron of the United States. So now we're talking about, which this will actually be the fifth Chiron return. It returns every 50 years. That's part of its cycle. So this will be the fifth one. The wound that is trying to be healed has to do with independence, freedom. That's the wound that the United States is trying to heal. It's also the wound that it has to address. And so once again, we are facing that question of freedom and independence and privacy on some level. This is the wound that we're working on, and it is going to be embedded in this election date. Not only that, but we have Pluto finishing up its time in Capricorn. And as you can see, it's aligned with the natal Pluto. The degrees are slightly different. It's 29 degrees on the day of the election, 27 degrees for the natal chart. So this is a Plutonic return, which takes 247 years. So we are back in the energy of revolution. And so I've already mentioned that we have Uranus, which was in this position in the Great Depression and leading up to World War II. We have the Revolutionary War that is also aligned here. Now, what will happen is Pluto will go into the next sign, Aquarius, and it will do so on November the 19th, and then it will permanently be in Aquarius. It will not go back into Capricorn. So to me, the way I would translate this is that at the time of the election, it will be a way of looking at the culmination of what has brought us to this election and brought the United States from 2008 to where it is right now in terms of disruption, in terms of upheaval, in terms of revolution. So this is, again, a perfect alignment. And this is, again, creating a type of stress on the position of things. So my point being that we're really looking at a dynamic date, and that what's likely to happen at that time is going to be disruptive, and it's going to be that the United States is experiencing fundamental karmic shifting. And that is going to be part and parcel of the election. So, again, no matter who's elected, this is what they're going to get in terms of being the representative for the United States, because this is what the United States is getting. The other one that I'll mention is Jupiter, also retrograde at the time, will be right on top of Mars. It will be moving away from it, just as Pluto at 29 degrees is moving away from the Pluto energy. So it's not quite as dramatic as it is when the energy is approaching, when they're actually coming close together. Same with Uranus. It's actually moving away because of the retrograde energy. Chiron, on the other hand, is coming into an exact alignment. But this Jupiter energy in Gemini is, again, a question of philosophy, but it's right on Mars. And so the vitriol, the aggression, the debate, the anger, all of that energy is still going to be amplified out of the election. Again, I don't see this being one of those scenarios in which things are, quote, resolved. It's simply going to be a matter of things being very challenging as part and parcel of the actual experience itself. So there are, of course, many other things that can be looked at, but these are the ones that really stand out significantly about the election moment and how that's going to play on the US chart. The last one I'll mention, again, this is specific to this chart, is that Saturn will actually be forming a square with the ascendant and the descendant of the US chart at this particular time. So we're talking about, again, more challenging energy, more, if you will, forced growth. Saturn having to do with structure and discipline. The ascendant is how the United States presents itself, which has to do with Sagittarius being the explorer, being the missionary, being the one that brings its philosophy out into the world. That's what it presents. The descendant being what it is trying to learn from the world, which is to listen, to learn, and bring in other cultures. I mean, in many ways, I do like the Sibley chart in terms of how the United States has presented itself and how it's actually developed. But this Saturnian energy will be in Pisces, and it will be in the fourth house, which deals with family. So we're talking about the roots are having to be restructured and redisciplined, and that will be part of the election cycle as well. So once again, my phrase is, it's not to put too fine a point on it, but it's going to be a major event. The election is going to literally be a major event in terms of astrological energy. Now, from here, I actually want to take a look at the chart of the two candidates. And the first chart that we're going to take a look at is Kamala Harris's chart and the US chart. So the thing to think about, or not the US chart, but the chart of the election. The thing to think about is, what does the person that is an avatar and wanting to be the avatar for a country, what do they represent? And so traditional astrology, going back into history prior to really what we would consider modern astrology, there was no person getting their birth chart done locally. It was only the leaders of the country, the people of wealth, the people that were making the decisions, and they were seen as representatives of how the country would go. And so we look at this in terms of, well, what is going on at the time of the election for Kamala Harris? What are the energies that she is going to be facing, and how might they play out? And again, not to suggest that it gives her a favorable result, like I can look at this and go, oh, she's going to win, or I can look at Donald Trump's chart and say, oh, he's going to win. But both of them will be having a powerful experience. They are here to be in this historical moment, and there are certain things that are definitely going to be heavily activated for them. So the one or two or three that are going to be readily stand out for Kamala are going to involve Uranus, which will actually be here right on top of Jupiter and moving back towards her Jupiter, because Uranus is retrograde. and it's occurring in the 12th house, which is the secret self or hidden things. So again, the idea being that whoever takes this role, whoever ends up in this role, if we do get to that place where it's one of these two individuals, they are going to be thrown into a moment of history that will match with the time that Washington was president, the time that Abraham Lincoln was president, the time that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president. So this individual, whoever it is going to be in a moment of amplified history. And the phrase I'm using right now is they're either going to step up or they're going to get stepped on by history. And the things that are going to be occurring are going to be so much larger than these campaign claims and this simplistic, sort of tit for tat kind of thing that we have going on in the political ads that show up, where it's trying to reduce everything to these simplified concepts. Nothing is simplified about this time in any way, shape, or form. So for Harris, this is an opportunity to have a surprising or shocking opportunity to expand and try to provide stability, actually, because her Jupiter is in the sign of Taurus and Uranus is in Taurus. So that will be part of her dynamic energy. Jupiter itself will be actually coming into an alignment with her ascendant. Now, this is where it's not as powerful because it's moving away, but it's close enough to talk about that there is an expansion for her. As to whether or not that expansion will continue by her winning the presidency or not, that one's up for grabs. But she's definitely going to be experiencing, with Jupiter moving through her first house, more of an outward expansion than she's probably ever experienced, except the other times that Jupiter was transiting. And this is where it can get really interesting when we're looking at the charts of individuals, whether they're famous or your own chart, is that Jupiter goes through a sign every year. So every 12 years, it comes back around on itself. So we can look at those periods and go, well, there should have been a period where you had expansion in this area of your life because it was transiting there. So if I had the time and I wanted to take the time, I could look at it and go, well, what was going on for Harris at the time that she was having this transit? Now, the other thing that's showing up at this particular time is Venus is approaching her descendant on the day of the election. So most likely this will be a very tight election in terms of the actual votes. Again, the landslide, if it does occur, it would probably occur at the electoral college level, but I don't think it will occur at the voting level. I think this will be, again, this is a prediction I'm comfortable making. I'm comfortable saying I think it'll be close in terms of the actual votes. But I could see that a victory could go one way in terms of the electoral college. It could be a little bit more of a landslide again for either candidate. The last thing I want to mention is Saturn on that particular day will be coming into an alignment with Chiron. Now, again, it's retrograde, so it's close, but it's kind of moving away. So these energies do indicate that there is a lot of activity that's happening, as well as the energy just really reflecting opportunity for Kamala Harris. So that's what's showing up for her on the day of the election. And again, the question being, what does this translate to? And the other challenging aspect would be Pluto in a square with her sun. But once again, it's moving away, it's separating. So there's a bit of energy that is not quite tightly aligned, but it is aligned enough that it keeps her in the game for sure. She's definitely going to be a viable candidate to win the presidency. And on that day, that energy will be present. Now, I want to do the same thing by looking at Donald Trump's chart as well in relation to the actual day of the election. So the thing that's going on for Trump that's quite significant, but once again, also happening in a similar vein where the energy is not approaching, it's actually separating, is that Uranus at that time, and actually during the time, it was even more direct in relation to his Mars and ascendant in his natal chart at the time of his first assassination attempt when they actually got a shot off. So this energy is in play actually for Trump, not only until the end of the year, but going well into next year, because this will go back direct and then it will move towards these energies. And then it won't actually get out of Taurus until 2026. So whether Trump wins or not, his energy will stay in a volatile state and he will still be very much in the public eye because what's happening is Uranus is moving back towards his midheaven, which is in Taurus in the 10th house. So again, very much a viable player, very much in the effect of things. Now, what's interesting is the Jupiterian energy is right on top of his north node. I mean, literally by degree. This is a stretch goal. And this really does kind of beg the question of what will be the world that Trump will be entering that may require adjustment because of complexities that he will not have control over. For example, if there's an economic downturn, which most likely is on the radar, very significantly on the radar, is there the possibility that there is more natural disaster impacts that can really redirect resources within the United States? Absolutely. Also on the radar. And so I do think that once again, there is an energy here suggesting that for him, it will be again, you're either going to step up or you're going to get stepped on. And the idea being that that's going to be a karmic stretch goal with regard to his energy. Venus also is going to be in play. It's going to be very close to his moon. Once again, it's a little bit beyond it, so it's not giving approaching energy, but it is viable. So clearly, he is well supported by the people that do support him, deeply supported. That energy is definitely in effect for him as well. So once again, the day of the election is dynamic. It's going to certainly play dynamically for these individuals and is going to be an important part of it. And there are things that can show up that are simply saying this is an advantage for this individual, this is a disadvantage. Where it will actually fall at the end of the process is going to be a discovery. I can predict that it's going to be a bit of a discovery unless one of the other scenarios, which is no election happens, someone's not there for the election, something of that nature transpires. Outside of that, if the election does occur and both individuals are there and healthy and viable, it's going to be up in the air until it's decided. And again, most likely not on the date of the election. Now, what I do want to do, continuing along and trying to sort of talk about what we're in essence dealing with is I wanted to take a look at the actual different periods and what's going on in terms of those times in relation to the US chart. And so this chart is the United States chart on the inside with the transits of the outer points at the time of the Civil War. So this is April 12th, 1961 at Fort Sam Houston in Texas, where it's marked as the date and 4:30 a.m., even a time for when it happened. So this is the energy that was happening. And what's interesting is that at that particular time, there was a Uranus return. So Uranus is clearly a player that does involve questions of war, questions of disruption. And this was a return period for the United States when this did happen. So once again, we're seeing Uranus having a key role at a disruptive period, but this was the Civil War in and of itself. Now, what's interesting, the next thing I want to show you in terms of lining up the symbols is I want to take a look at where we are right now in terms of the alignment. And this is going to be the United States chart and the Civil War and also the current energies right now. So we have the United States chart on the center. The second ring is the time of the Civil War. The outer ring is the position of where the points are today. And what's key to be shown here is not the Uranian piece, it's Neptune. At the time that the Civil War started, Neptune was in Pisces at 29 degrees, and right now Neptune is in Pisces at 27 degrees. And so we are seeing this Civil War energy repeating itself. And it wasn't until Neptune got into Aries that there was a sense of how it was going to play out. I think the election is in many ways going to represent the starting point of what will then mimic the Civil War energy. And then Neptune will go into Aries permanently in 2026. And I think what we could potentially see, regardless of who is president, is the balkanization of the United States. That means that it is going to break up into different areas, maybe states secede or regions become more defined as this is a region of a certain approach economically, socially, whatever it happens to be. And so it may not even be so much a clear division as it could be a number of sections. But what we will probably see in a similar vein is that whichever direction, so let's use the abolitionists and let's use the people that were supporting slavery that had the war gone a particular way, one of those was going to set the tone for the future. It turned out to be anti-slavery, but had the South won and continued on, then slavery would have been the philosophical position that would have continued on. So it isn't that we're necessarily going to go in a direction one way or the other. It's that there will be, by the time Neptune hits, this is the prediction, that by the time Neptune hits Aries, there will be an understanding of who won actually and who lost in this particular election. It won't be clear, but we'll probably start to get a sense of this is where the battle is continuing, and the actual shot, the if you will, the shot at Fort Sam Houston is going to happen around the time of the election, and then we're going to see which group prevails, which one gets to write the history going forward. And once again, it doesn't matter what I think I would like. I mean, I have a position of things I would like. I certainly want a more unified world. I want people to be able to have differing opinions, but not be destructive about it. Those are things that I absolutely do support. The question is, how's that going to come about? And I'm not sure that either one of those candidates is going to necessarily help that process along per se. But the idea being that by the time this Neptunian energy gets through 2025 and hits 2026, that again, there will be some sense of, well, this is what we got. Now let's live in that world and figure out how we're going to make that world work. So again, here's the idea of how does this play out historically? And this is just the Neptunian transit. Now, in terms of the next energy, which is, okay, Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, 7:30 a.m. This is the natal chart, and this is what's going on in terms of the transits at the time and what's happening. Interestingly enough, probably the marker for this particular event does have to do with Uranus and Saturn being conjunct in Taurus, something that was going to be a disruption to the fabric or the stability of the United States. We also have Jupiter. Notice that Jupiter is in alignment with Mars, and that is going to be something that is also happening on the day of the election. So once again, we can see these patterns. Pluto at that time on top of the U.S. North Node. So once again, from an astrological standpoint, we can really see these events having key moments in them. Now, as I said, what's interesting to me is, well, okay, well, what happens when we drop the U.S. election chart and the time that we're living in right now on top of the chart of Pearl Harbor, start of World War II, and the U.S. chart? Well, now we see Pluto, not Pluto, but Jupiter lined up with Jupiter, all aligned with Mars here. We see that Uranus is in alignment with itself, which is the Uranian return. Pluto is down here, that is still playing with the revolutionary energy, but we can see here the connectivity of these points with regard to what's going on in the U.S. now that was going on at the time of the beginning of the Second World War. And so here again, this is a difficult time. There is just no way around it. And what could be happening that can be disruptive with Uranus? The key of Uranus in Taurus to me wasn't just the war, it was the changes in daily society, things that we now look at with regard to AI and medicine, technology. The women went into the workforce at that time. Penicillin became a commonly used resource for combating illness. All sorts of things on daily life, telecommunications development, eventually development of rocket-powered flight. I mean, all of these things are on the watch of Uranus in Taurus and leading into Gemini, which is, again, is what we're experiencing at this particular time. So it's sobering. I mean, it's sobering for me to take a look at it. It's sobering for me to share this information. I want to be an optimist, but what I do think, and what I will offer in terms of prediction is that we still have at least honestly 3 to 5 years to go before whatever needs to settle settles. And part of what I do, I stay abreast of what's going on a level of what are the shifts that are happening that show fundamental change to society that does represent a new world order that is coming about. And that's going to involve advances in technology. I think we're also going to face more difficulty with regard to planetary disruption from natural disasters. We also have a demographic shift occurring. If you wanted to take the time to read about population decline, there are plenty of articles about it happening throughout the entire world. Most Western societies are in decline, and there is, of course, the drumming of the beating of the drums that this is going to be a tremendously disastrous thing. But one thing I look at when I'm thinking about things astrologically and spiritually is that these are shifting times, and part of the shift is that there is probably a need for downsizing in order to keep from overloading the system. The debt, without a doubt, because the entire world's in debt, and debt basically means that you are borrowing from the future, and that debt ratio is reaching a critical enough mass to where it's going to be unable to be avoided. The term that's been used in a number of articles is kicking the can down the road. At some point, there is an end to the road, and I think we're going to be seeing that end of the road in the next 3 to 5 years. So, what does this mean? Like, okay, you've listened to all of this, and oh my goodness, this doesn't sound good. What's going on? Is to realize that this is the part of the journey that you selected to be in, I selected to be in. How do we navigate it? And what does this knowledge help us understand? So when I'm working with clients individually, what I'm trying to communicate to people, first of all, is how are all these things playing in your chart? I know how they're playing in my chart, and I recognize what I'm having to deal with. While I'm also part of the United States, I'm part of the global community, I'm part of the larger transits. But what is it that will help each person navigate getting through? While maybe on a larger scale, there's going to have to be some very hard, unpleasant experiences in the same vein of the previous wars, the Great Depression, all of those things. This energy is absolutely in play. How do we, with this knowledge, if we acknowledge that it's transpiring, what do we do to take care of ourselves, the people we care about, our communities, whatever it happens to be? That's a big part of the actual process. So, what I do want to offer, and the reason I did this reading along with the readings that I did using the I Ching and the reading that I did with the tarot cards, which the I Ching reading it's hopeful in the sense of, what we probably recognize that we need. Can we get there? It's going to be a long road. I think there's going to have to be some pressure externally that shifts things for people. Um, Unfortunately, that may be through war, that may be through natural disaster. I'm not sure it's going to be occurring through political will anytime soon. Not with what is kind of observable about what's going on in almost all political arenas at this juncture. And then the tarot reading was and more in alignment with the astrology reading. There's just a lot going on that suggests that the election is going to be a volatile experience that's not going to be very satisfying, except in the sense of if we can get it to actually transpire. I do think that that will be helpful to us on a psychological level. But we also still, again, not only are we dealing with issues of economics, social media is a big player in our story. That's the Uranus Taurus energy. Belief systems and how they're being dealt with, whether we're talking about questions around political stances, questions around gender and equity. Again, all of this is very much in play. And then we've got literal disruption to the global economy, the economies locally, questions about, well, if there is a particular position that's taken, and let's say Trump comes into power, Trump definitely, I think, it attaches to a traditional view of protectionism and isolationism, which is very much the view that the United States held up until World War II. Harris is probably going to be more of a tied into the global community and trying to figure out how to navigate that and stay within the global connectivity. But again, the rest of the world is going through its own series of changes and things that are happening that are outside of the control of any political leader. And I think knowing this, I hope, is going to be something that helps you navigate. And these tools are the tools that help me navigate. I mean, it's sometimes it's a little bit challenging to look at the things and go, whoa, this is really major. We're talking about years of development, years of transition, upsetting apple carts, things that are going to be quite significant. So this is what I felt compelled to share. I hope it has been informative, and on some level, I hope it does prove to be useful because it is my best attempt to be clear and transparent about what I see going on and what I do think this election does represent on a much bigger scale than the individual candidates. And I do think that the issues that are involved are tremendously larger than the candidate positions, and they're going to be walking into a massive storm. And we're going to see what they do when they're in that storm and how they choose to handle it. Anyway, be well, and thank you for watching.